Hello, everybody. Welcome to the... No, it's a new title for our podcast, man. Welcome to the Basu and Godin notebook, the new iteration of our podcast.
That's going to take some. Hello. It's going to take some getting used to. Hello, Marc-Antoine Godin. We are still friends, everyone.
Yes.
Even though we are no longer coworkers, but now we are. We're very happy to be with SDPN and really excited to be a part of what they're building. As they add a Canadiens podcast to their portfolio, the same guy who you can go on YouTube and see how he reacted to the Canadiens beating the Maple Leafs in the first round a few years ago, now has a Canadiens podcast in his portfolio, along with Jesse Blake and Adam Wild, and we're really excited to be a part of it. A real growing kind of business here, and circumstances just made it a perfect fit for us to come over here and continue what we've been doing for the last 6 years over at The Athletic, and now doing it with SDPN. We're super excited.
Yeah, so the people who were listening to us on The Athletic support back in the day, so I'm not with The Athletic anymore. I'm with Radio-Canada. And so those who are familiar with the way that, we've been doing our podcast for the past few years, there's going to be a few changes. First and foremost, now there's going to be a video feed that's available on YouTube, which is a nice addition. We're going to be there twice a week on Mondays and Fridays. So even though we released this first episode on the Tuesday because of Canadian Thanksgiving, we will have our regular shows on Mondays and on Fridays. But they're going to be only in English because, I'm busy doing a podcast in French back at the Radio-Canada, so it's going to be only in English. So for those who are wondering, but otherwise, we intend to remain true to ourselves. So our tone, our opinions, our style will largely remain the same.
Yeah, just in case for our French listeners, Marc-Antoine mentioned that he's doing the podcast at Radio-Canada, so you can hear him in French. I do a weekly hit on 91.9 on the Georges Larac and Stéphane Gonzalez show in French every Wednesday. So you'll be able to hear me in French as well. But here we will be 100% English, but twice a week like we were last season. And so every Mondays and Fridays you will hear us. And we have some fun kind of regular features that we will get to eventually. But obviously, we're at the beginning of the season, and we learned a lot about the Canadiens on Monday. So we thought we would dive into just all the things that happened on Monday, and a lot. Well, from Sunday to Monday, which was basically overtook everything we learned over the course of training camp. It just had this massive gush of information when there was not a whole lot. Even line combinations were kind of in the dark until practice on Monday, and obviously the big waiver news on Sunday with Joel Armia and to a lesser extent Gustav Lindstrom clearing waivers on Monday afternoon. So a lot of things became clear for this edition of the Canadiens, and we're going to get right into it right now.
Yeah, so it's funny because I remember at some point in training camp we were asked about Martin Saint-Louis changing Alex Newhook from one group to another. There were still tons of guys at camp, and Martin said, "Oh, you guys are lost a little bit, right?" Well, I think I'm lost too. So there was so much going on, so many movements, so many moving parts that he seemed a bit confused himself. And there's a lot more clarity that has happened in the last couple of days. But you mentioned Joel Armia. I'd like to hear you first on that news, because having him put on waivers and eventually sent down to the Laval Rocket. From a strict hockey perspective, it was the thing to do. But it came, it was at the same time, it was sort of a gutsy move because he's sort of a staple. He's a veteran on this team. He's the guy who's been there for a while. It's a significant contract to bury down in Laval. So what did you make of Armia being put on waivers?
Well, listen, this is not this administration's guy. No. This contract was signed by Marc Bergevin, and it's not as if every contract signed by Marc Bergevin is undesirable to the Jeff Gorton, Ken Hughes regime, but this one apparently is. And if you think to kind of a point I made in the story out of Monday's practice is Martin St. Louis mentioning at the very beginning of camp, after Tanner Pearson was acquired, that with veterans, the body of work comes into play a lot more than with younger players. Well, Joel Armia's body of work with this administration has not been great. It's really just been a very pedestrian player, inconsistency. And that's one thing Marty mentioned, the body of work. How does a player acquire body of work? It's because of their consistency. They haven't seen that from Joel Armia. So it's a big number, $3.4 million and you're going to bury, 2/3 of it or a third of it only in Laval. The rest of it's going to stay on the Canadiens' books. But really, this is a culture thing to my eyes. Watching Armia play in the final preseason game in Ottawa, he was playing like a guy who just wanted to get through the last preseason game and get to the regular season because he has a job and he's safe and he doesn't have to do anything to prove himself, and just kind of going through the motions. And to me, well, I don't know, he probably wasn't aware of it, but he probably didn't know he was kind of fighting for a job. But and even at that point, I get the impression, in retrospect, I didn't think it at the time, but in retrospect, I think they had made up their mind on Joel Armia when they got Tanner Pearson. And that really, we looked at Tanner Pearson, or I looked at Tanner Pearson as kind of filling a hole left by Mike Hoffman, but really, ultimately, he's filling a hole that was to be left by Joel Armia, at least for the time being.
Yeah, and what's interesting also is that you look at guys like Raphaël Harvey-Pinard, Emil Heideman, or Jesse Olonen. They all played a lot of minutes on PK during training camp, whereas Armia in his 2 games played only 28 seconds, and that's a role that should have been his. If they were
something he's legitimately good at.
Exactly. So the fact that he was taken off of that was also a red flag. He should have known, instead of going through the motions, he should have known right from day one that his job was in jeopardy. And you could argue that the reason why he eventually was waived is because even during regular season last year, during the games, he was going through the motions too. So at some point, you need to show something, and, his body of work goes back, his quality work, the one that enabled him to get that contract, goes back to the Canadiens in the playoffs going to the finals. That's when he was very effective with Corey Perry. But since then, under the new administration, he's been absent,
pedestrian,
or injured.
Or injured. And so, but still, I think it does send a pretty clear message, and it's a good message to send for an administration that they're trying to run a meritocracy, and obviously not every decision will be solely based on a meritocracy, but burying or eating, over $2 million in salary, while for a guy to have a guy not play in Montreal, I think sends a message that you have to earn your spot. And Armia clearly didn't do that. But you mentioned Ylönen playing on the PK. I mean, there's one thing I found interesting about what happened on Monday is even Ylönen himself. I remember last year at one point talking to Jesse Ylönen, while the team was ravaged by injuries, and just asking if he'd ever killed penalties before, and if he thinks he'd be good at it, and if he'd like a shot at that. And he kind of laughed a bit because he's like, no, I've never played. I'm a power play guy. I've never played on the penalty kill. I don't know how to play. And fast forward to Monday, and he's like, I was happy to get on the penalty kill. Like, now he knows that he needs a gate of entry into the NHL. And every player in the NHL,
we gave it to him.
Absolutely, he did. And because it's not hard to see how his various skills, he has a quick first step. He has a good acceleration. He's an excellent skater. He's a smart player. There's a lot of things that he does that could translate into being a good penalty killer. The only thing he's missing is any body of work, to get back to that term. Like, he's never done it at any level. Always been a power play guy, but every player goes through this. Every player who arrives in the NHL, we were talking a little while ago, you were talking about Guy Carbonneau, as a guy who was a prolific scorer in junior and comes to the NHL, realize that's not going to work. I better find another way to do things. I think Jesse Ylönen is seeing that in his usage. It looks like he's going to be in a fourth line role to start the season, but with a role on the penalty kill. And that's a way he can carve out a niche because he has offensive skills, but I don't think he has the type of offensive skills that would make him an offensive player in the NHL.
Well, that's it. When you've been an offensive player at lower levels, you arrive in the NHL, and it's not quite that. Either it's adapt or die. So either you elevate your game or you adapt your game and change it in a way that's you're going to be able to carve yourself a role. Because I don't see him having the sort of tools that would earn him a spot on the top 6 anytime soon. Maybe on the third line eventually, depending on his improvement, depending on injuries. That I could see. But that's pretty. I think he's 24 years old. I think it's as far as he can go in terms of development. But if he starts in the NHL, if he starts with a regular spot on the team, because it looks as though Pezzetta might be the 13th forward for the time being, I think it's already a win for him. But he's got to run with it, take what the opportunities that are given to him, and make the most out of it. But it was clearly his job to lose, and he played. He showcased himself quite interestingly in the eyes of management, because they like the fact that he came in slightly more fast, slightly bigger.
Okay. I thought you were going to say slightly more fat.
No.
Yeah.
No.
But they did use the term heavy.
Faster, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Heavier. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But heavier, but it did not affect his skating at all. So
no, and it's an interesting kind of dynamic. I think obviously his waiver status helped him, right? I mean, he had to clear waivers to go down to Laval. Emil Heideman did not, and Martin St. Louis on Monday did not deny the fact that it kind of came down to the two of them. And it's an interesting kind of dynamic, because I think it's similar, and Marty admitted it was a similar thing with Justin Barron and Matthias Norlinder. And I think the similarities are not just that you're talking about two waiver exempt guys, and even Barron actually didn't need waivers to go down, but still like more of an NHL experienced guy. But I think in both the cases of Norlinder and Heideman, I would be encouraged by the fact that the organization wants them to go to Laval and play an offensive role. And so that they see them in an offensive role eventually in the NHL, that Heideman is not necessarily best served playing on a fourth line, perhaps. And Martin St. Louis mentioned that he'll be in a better chair in Laval than he would be in Montreal. And maybe by better, he means more appropriate or more similar to what we hope to see him in eventually in Montreal. And so I wouldn't be overly discouraged, and it depends on what the messaging was from the team. But to me, I look at kind of the way they went about it. If I'm both Norlinder and Heideman, I look at this like, okay, they want me to go do this in Laval so that I could do something similar to that in the NHL eventually. I'm just not ready for that. Whereas with Ulanen, he would probably be in a chair in Laval that he will never, as you just mentioned, never really fill in Montreal. So, yeah. I mean, if you want to look at the upside for the guys who got cut, I think that's it.
Yeah, that's especially true, I think, for Heideman. For Norlinder, you were talking about meritocracy earlier. I think that between him and Barron, he had the better camp.
Yeah, but again, meritocracy, but also practicality. You have to be practical. And so to me, if Barron winds up being the seventh defenseman, and it's not going to be set in stone, but it looks that way right now, he's got to be wondering, like, why are they willing to have me sit out? Wouldn't they rather have me play in Laval? Like, they could easily send me to Laval. Mm-hmm. And so they're willing to have me sit and kind of rotate in, and eventually he'll get games, but he's not going to play regularly, whereas Norlinder's going to go down to Laval. He's going to play a lot, especially based on the way he played in camp. Like, he showed a lot of promise and really was the surprise of training camp in my eyes, and maybe deserved to make the team. But to me, Xhekaj quarterbacking the second power play unit, that's another gate of entry, right? For both Norlinder and Barron. Barron has to be, looking at that and being like, okay, that's when I get my shot, I'm going to have to make the most of that, because, when Marty was kind of explaining Xhekaj being the second quarterback on the power play is, well, we foresee him in the lineup. So therefore we want to get him reps as a second quarterback on the power play. But if Norlinder were in the lineup, and even if Barron were in the lineup, you would think that one of them would be kind of more appropriate. So I think I brought
that up with Barron on Monday, and he said he said last year, don't forget last year in second half of the season, me and Xhekaj, we shared that responsibility. But now it's his job. That's one role that he has to go after because it can be potentially his. It doesn't have to be Xhekaj's. Of course, Xhekaj's got a great shot, but had they kept Norlinder, I would have pictured Norlinder being in that role a lot more than Xhekaj.
Well, it's interesting. Today before practice, the second unit went onto the second ice in Brassard on its own. They had already set up kind of 3 nets across the opposing blue line. Alex Burrows was there, but really it was Marty, running the show. Very, very hands-on, and specifically with Xhekaj. They were doing breakouts, explaining sort of angles that you can attack sort of the defensive perimeter that they would set up at the opposing blue line, what angles you could take where. The nets were placed in areas where they don't want to enter the zone. And he was really specifically showing them routes, angles, very, very hands-on. And it seemed like the entire purpose of the entire exercise was not for the 4 other guys. It was for Arber Xhekaj to learn how to kind of run a breakout on the power play, even though he's done it before. But from the looks of it, to me, that looked like the primary objective. So listen, it's a great opportunity for Arber Xhekaj. I mean, let's not kind of gloss that over. If he can prove efficient in that role, then he just ups his value even more, on top of being sort of the one unique, highly physical, tougher, if you will, sort of intimidating presence on defense. If you can add this to your portfolio, then you just added that much more value to what you represent to the team.
Yeah, there are so many guys though that are in the second year of their career in the NHL. There's so many guys that are potentially exposed to the sophomore slump. It's not a myth, but it certainly does not affect everybody. But I mean, according to studies, it's basically 1/3 of the second year guys will get sophomore slump. 1/3 will significantly improve, and 1/3 will just remain the same from their performance level in the first year. So there's bound to be guys on the Canadiens roster that might regress from their rookie season. And I think Xhekaj will be an interesting guy to watch because I wonder if he's in which category he's going to fall. If they ask him a whole lot more than what he did last year, they add those responsibilities on the power play. You factor in the fact that he did not play the second half of last year. It's going to be tricky. It might be in terms of workload. Is he going to be up to the task, or is he going to be one of those guys who takes a step back before taking another step forward?
Yeah, and frankly, at times during training camp, I thought we were taking it for granted that he was on the team. Obviously, that was completely false. Like, not only is he on the team, he's got a very solid role. But I did think and the way he navigates, he made the team last year by being that kind of brute force guy. And we saw glimpses of it over training camp, but he's really trying to transition into a phase where the league knows that he has that in him. They know that he can fight. They know he's going to look for big hits, but he doesn't have to go out of his way trying to do that, And so, I think from a sophomore slump perspective, I think he's got a lot of things going on in terms of transitioning to his NHL persona, if you will, that maybe other second-year players don't have to deal with. Like Caden Goalie is going to be, in all likelihood, the same Caden Goalie that we saw last year and the same Caden Goalie that we've seen for years. The one element of Caden Goolie's game that he would slowly like to incorporate is essentially what we're talking about with Xhekaj, is kind of that meanness. When he was in his last year of junior, if you were entering the zone on his side, you better have your head up. Like he was coming for you. But he made the point that he didn't do that in his first year of junior, that he built up to that point, which something he would like to do in the NHL. It's funny, Xhekaj is kind of going in the opposite direction, where he's trying to tone it down a little bit.
Yeah. So Monday's practice, which was the one where we saw, the 23 guys that were kept on the roster, told us a lot. It was a very revealing practice because it was just an introduction to your 2023-2024 Montreal Canadiens. And I think one of the things that really stood out is the fact that Martin St. Louis will work with a very malleable lineup. You know how he said throughout camp, we've got a lot of good options, a lot of guys that can play either wing or center, guys that can go up and down the lineup. You mentioned Tanner Pearson earlier. He's one of those guys. Obviously, Raphaël Harvey-Pinard is another guy who can go up and down the lineup. And there are others like that. Alex Newhook, who's going to start the season on the left side of Kirby Dach. So, you know, how good an indicator is it when you see a team that seems to be so malleable? Is it necessarily a good thing, or you would like to see more things that are, you know, set in stone?
Well, sure. I'm sure Marty St. Louis would like to see more things set in stone. It's not where the Canadiens are as a team. You know, I mean, I think, listen, they're playing the Leafs on Wednesday. You know, the Leafs are not as malleable because they have really good players and they've played together for a really long time and they know how to play with each other. Yeah. It's just not true of the Canadiens. You know, I mean, you have Suzuki and Caulfield who appear to be a duo. And frankly, I think at some point in this season, we'll see how things go. And they're going to start the season with Josh Anderson, which was like an unmitigated disaster last season. But, you know, it's apparently, you know, Marty's kind of banking on some of the work he's done with Anderson to kind of diversify his game and change his game a little bit. But really, that's the only – Caulfield and Suzuki is really the only thing the Canadiens have that can be anywhere near similar in terms of familiarity, in terms of just a known quantity that the Maple Leafs have in spades. You know, I mean, so it's really – when you have a lineup like that, this is just Martin St. Louis' reality. And you know, you look at a guy like – they also have a lot of malleable players. You know, you have Sean Monahan who could play center and wing. You have Alex Newhook who could play center and wing. You have Kirby Dach who could play center and wing. You have guys who can, you know, Raphael Harvey-Pinard, Brendan Gallagher, even a Tanner Pearson maybe who can play up and down the lineup. You can, you know, be just as comfortable on a fourth line as a first line. So at a certain point, I think Martin St. Louis has to look at his group of forwards and just be like, okay, listen, we don't have the firepower of the other teams in our division, you know, maybe Detroit excluded, but even that. But what we do have is this. We have versatility, we have depth, we have these things. So how can I get an advantage using that strength of ours? Yeah. Because the other strengths, you look on paper and they're obviously not there. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, it'd be nice if it wasn't so malleable. It'd be nice if at the beginning of training camp, everyone's like, well, this is what the lineup's going to look like. And there's a job here, here, and here to be had. At the beginning of training camp, there were, 10 jobs to be had at forward. You know, I mean, maybe 9 if you considered it given that Kirby Dach was going to be the second line center, Suzuki and Caulfield were going to be on the first line. That was it. Yeah. There were 9 spots up for grabs, not necessarily in terms of roster spots, but in terms of where you play in the lineup. It was anyone's game, and honestly, like before practice on Monday, we weren't really sure what we were going to see. And it's funny as reporters, you know, it's catnip lines at practice, you know, we need that stuff, and you know, and people who follow us on Twitter or read us, they want that stuff too, and we hadn't had it for so long. Yeah, nothing that really gave an indication of what was going to happen in the season. So on Monday, it was finally we have that, but I think it's just a reflection of where the Canadiens are. Like they have to be malleable. They're malleable by default. It's not like they want to be.
There's also the fact that, you know, if you want to set things in stone a lot with that sort of team, if things don't work out or if there are injuries, you have to show that you can move around, have chemistry with different guys, and that everybody's got the same understanding of what's required of them, no matter who they play with. Because even Suzuki and Caulfield, at some point, who knows? They might be separated at some point in the season.
There's a very valid argument to be made that they should be separated.
Yeah.
Like now. So
who knows? Maybe we'll see Caulfield with Dach at some point in the season. So I like that because it's not necessarily the fact that there's no real certainties. It's to me what's important is those 12 players, are they better than the 12 players the Canadiens had before? And if they move around, if they prove that each of those guys, if they're asked to play a role in the top 6, will be able to do the job, well, that's good. It's got to be death by 1,000 cuts with the Montreal Canadiens, because whether you like it or not, it's still a weak link team. It's not a strong link team.
There it is.
Yeah, I know it's one of our
Strong
pet
link,
peeves.
weak link. Yes. No, I'm so happy because I wrote about it, I don't know when, at some point in training camp, just not that long ago, about a week ago. And I asked Marty about that because I remember asking. It's funny, actually.
In Montembeault.
I asked him in Montembeault, but I also wrote this exact story coming off opening night. I think it was 4 years ago, and it was in Toronto, and I asked Mike Babcock about it. Mike Babcock was coaching a strong link team at the time. Sorry, for everyone who's not aware of the strong link, weak link theory, it's a theory where some sports are strong link sports where if you have the best player, you have the best chance of winning. And some are weak link sports where your worst players have to be better than the other team's worst players in order to give you the best chance of winning. So like soccer is an example of a weak link sport, basketball, an example of a strong link sport. And I remember I asked Babcock after that, for morning skate ahead of the season opener, where he felt about that. And he, surprisingly, mentioned depth. Yep. He had he had arguably the most strong link team in the league at that time in terms of their salary structure and everything. The Leafs have been top heavy in terms of their money for forever now. And he was like, I've never seen a team win without depth. And he's right. It's true. But you need a combination of the two. So Marty, I asked him about it and he hadn't heard that theory. And so I actually shared, there's a Malcolm Gladwell podcast that refers to this about college financing in the United States, but applies this theory to that. And I sent it to him and asked him to listen to it or he was happy to listen to it. And he kind of thought hockey falls closer to soccer than it would to basketball, or closer to weak link than to strong link. And you look at his team and that's kind of how he has to coach his team. I mean, he has a good weak link team, I think the fourth line as it's currently constituted, assuming what we saw on Monday sticks through Wednesday, Ulanen, Evans, and Harvey Pinard. You're looking at a guy in Harvey Pinard who was lighting up the NHL last year for a period of time and was one of the hottest scorers in the league, playing with Nick Suzuki, scoring once every 4 times he shot the puck, which obviously is not sustainable, but still showed an ability to play in high leverage situations. And Ulanen we already talked about, but and Jake Evans is a pretty solid fourth line center. And so, my thing is that if you can, hockey's a game of matchups, right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes the bottom end of the lineup is asked to kind of break even so the top end guys can win their matchups. I think the Canadiens, it might not be fair, but I think to some extent against certain teams, and I think Toronto being one of them, might be asking their top guys to break even so that maybe their bottom guys can win their matchups, and that could be their sort of path to victory.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the fourth line because I was referring to Joel Armia playing on the fourth line with Corey Perry and Eric Stahl during the playoffs, and there you go. You had a very, very strong fourth line. It helped the Canadiens because during all of Marc Bergevin's tenure, the Canadiens were a weak link team. So that's how they were built because their only star was in nets, but otherwise, you look at the
now they don't even have that.
What's that?
Now they don't even have that. They
no,
don't even have
they
that
don't.
star in nets. Yeah,
no, they don't. And it might as well, since you bring up the goalies, let's switch to that because I was watching the waiver wire this afternoon, and you realize that there are other teams in the Atlantic Division, like Buffalo or Detroit, that have decided also to start the season with 3 goalies on their roster. And today, on Monday afternoon, you had the Colorado Avalanche who claimed Ivan Provetov from Arizona. And funny enough, Provetov is 24 years old. His save percentage in the NHL is .871. Caden Primo is 24 years old, and his save percentage in the NHL is .871. I suspected that the Colorado Avalanche wanted, they were looking for a goalie because Pavel Francouz is heading to the IR again, and they're going to rely on just one goalie again. So they had to look for a capable backup, and they chose to go that route, to go with a younger, developing goalie that they could quote unquote tolerate on their lineup, and try to develop into a capable goaltender. So they went with Provetov, but had Primo been available, maybe he would have been the guy. So I think that even more than Primo's upside or how he has played so far in the NHL or even how he performed in camp, the concern from management that he might be claimed, and that would put the Montreal Canadiens in a position where after Allen and Montembeault, it goes directly to Jakub Dobeš, and they did not want that because they knew that they'd be exposed in terms of lack of depth. That's what forced them basically to say, well, you know what, we're going to start the season with 3 goalies. Yeah,
not only that, but just the notion of losing a player for nothing gives Kent Hughes hives. It's just like it's he refuses to let that happen. That's why Michael Pezzetta spent 2 months as a healthy scratch last season to start the year, because they did not want to lose him for nothing, and they were convinced that he was going to get claimed on waivers. Caden Primo's in a similar spot, except I would say, listen, Jake Allen and Sam Montembeault did not have a great training camp. Neither of them. They were both, in fact, quite bad. I don't think it's really telling of how they're going to perform in the regular season. But if it continues and the games count, Caden Primo's sitting right there. And so, there is, and it's listen, we're starting the season. Sam Montembeault does not have a contract extension, which we thought would have happened by now. I think it's fair to say, and I'm mildly surprised that it didn't.
Are you? Really?
A little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Because there's a risk that he's going to, if he performs the way he was trending last season, then the price point goes up. I mean, then you're looking at a bigger sample of quality play, and so that's a risk that they're taking. But I think the other side of it is that the sample that we saw last season wasn't all that big. And so I think if, from the Canadiens' point of view, I think it's a fair way to look at it. Like, okay, we'd like to see more of it and make sure it's real, because he would hardly be the first goalie we've ever seen to go on a hot streak out of nowhere and then crash back down to earth. But if it is, but if it is real and he continues playing well, then that contract negotiation is going to be trickier. It's. But
I think that was Montembeault's camp argument, and because Montembeault wanted to have a contract, he was willing to sign the deal before the season. But it's just that at some point, even before the training camp started, I really got the sense from the Canadiens that they were in no hurry whatsoever to have this done. So if it's got to be done, after Christmas, let it be. If it's got to be done after the season, let it be. But I didn't sense any urgency on their part to sort this situation out before the season.
Well, I mean, the reality is that in all likelihood, Sam Montembeault is not their goaltender of the future. It's not going to be a long-term contract where they think, okay, he's going to be our goalie when we expect to be competitive.
Yeah.
He's a bridge goalie. And so this would be a bridge contract. And, I don't know. I think Sam would have been open to signing it's not technically a bridge contract the way we think of bridge contracts traditionally, but to signing the kind of contract that Jake Allen signed, essentially, which is to get the Canadiens to a point where one of their goalie prospects is nearing NHL readiness, whether that's Dobeš, whether that's even Primo, whether that's Jacob Fowler, whether that's the Russian goalie they drafted. I mean, there are goalies in the pipeline, many of them, that they could realistically hope could be ready in 3 years, let's say. So, but in any case, the point being that he doesn't have a contract extension, and now, so that kind of ups his pressure to perform. Didn't have a great camp. Doesn't mean it's not the end of the world. But if I'm Caden Primo and I'm looking how Jake Allen played, I'm looking at how Sam Montembeault played, because he knows why he's made the team. I mean, he said on Monday, when did you know you made the team? He said, well, when I wasn't on waivers yesterday. So like he knows why he made the team. He's not stupid. He's the third goalie. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But there could be an opportunity if we get 2 weeks into the season. There's also kind of a sweet spot that the Canadiens, I think, are trying to identify because, the big player here is Tampa. What is Tampa going to do? Tampa's lurking. Tampa just submitted their opening roster yesterday. $2 under the cap plus all their kind of LTIR things, and so
I think that's a record being so close to the cap.
Brisebois has done it before. He did it. In fact,
at $2, I thought it was something like $8 or so.
Oh, it might have. Yeah, it was similarly ridiculously close. Like it was just like so. So they did that, signing Austin Watson and sliding $2 in. So they basically fully maximized what they'll get for Brent Seabrook and the second guy is escaping me. But anyhow, fully maximizing their LTIR capabilities. And so now that they've done that and they can actually put Andrei Vasilevsky on in-season LTIR, they have some money to play with.
That's it.
And so they can go and get a goalie. And so now all these teams that are keeping 3 goalies have to figure out how this is going to play out. And I think there's still a possibility that Primo gets traded. Like, I mean, but I don't think the Canadiens are willing to roll the dice that Primo would get claimed, even though to me personally, I have trouble seeing a scenario where a team looks at Caden Primo and, again, his body of work and says, oh, that's a guy I want on my NHL roster, no questions asked. I'm 100% going to go get him to be my backup goalie in the NHL. He's going to be my safety net, and I'm going to feel totally comfortable with that. I just don't see how that could be the case, but the Canadiens apparently seem to think that is the case.
Yeah, well, I think that's the reason why I was surprised to see that, to see them making that decision, because I was making the same calculation as you. Because you claim a goalie, you're going to keep it on your roster, so he's got to be better than your actual backup. And there's not that many teams that were in that situation. But you look. I mentioned earlier, Buffalo was keeping 3 goalies because Comrie could be, snatched on waivers. Detroit has kept Alex Lyon as a third string goalie. He's a guy who could have been a great fit for Tampa, but Tampa chose to pass on Martin Jones, and so they're going to stick with Johansson, and that second guy is named Matt Tompkins. That's who he is. So
yeah, but I also do think that there was maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure if Tampa was able to act until they did the things that they did on Monday.
Yeah. Because
they had to get to the opening night roster deadline $2 away from maximizing their LTIR, So there might have been an opportunity missed there to slide a goalie past them, but I also don't think it's only Tampa that the Canadiens or any other team are worried about. I think there are some other teams who are kind of looking for around to see if there's a goalie available. And so it's going to be a dance over the next coming days, perhaps weeks. Who knows how long this is going to last, but
luckily, I mean, apart from the Vegas, Arizona, and St. Louis trip at the end of October, early November, the first month and a half is really favorable for the Canadiens. They don't have a lot of games, but they
play 2 games a week for the first 2 weeks of the season.
I'm sorry?
They play 2 games a week for the first 2 weeks of the season. Yeah.
Well, there you go. So in that sense, it's they can go with having only one extra forward, one extra defenseman, and not carrying too many extras, and having that third string goalie, because it's not going to be such a pressing need. Eventually, later on in the schedule, it might become more of an issue, but they've got some leeway there.
But they play their first back-to-back on October 23rd and 24th. They play in Buffalo and at home to New Jersey.
There you go.
So they have a 2-week cushion where There's not much. It's not a very stressful schedule.
But
it's actually it's not a very difficult schedule either in terms of just the quality of teams that they're going to face.
Yeah, but whoever faces the Canadiens, they can say the same thing, that they're not facing the highest opposition.
No, of course. Well, of course not. But I mean, it's just, other than that, like, they got Toronto, Chicago, Minnesota, Washington, Buffalo, Jersey, which is obviously tough. Then they got Columbus, Winnipeg, and then they go on that trip you were talking about. So, yeah.
The fact that so much has been made about a third string goalie and Caden Primo situation and all that during camp, I wonder to which extent it's not a sign that it was not a camp with a whole lot of drama. There was not a lot of open spots. You were talking earlier about the fact that there were 9 jobs for grabs, but it was more about hierarchy, where is depth.
It was slotting, yeah.
Exactly. And in that sense, I think that camp was very interesting to see where the chips fell. But in terms of surprises or something like that, I think that people hung on to the hope that there would be someone that really exploded or came out of nowhere or forced himself into a roster spot. What did you make of, either the surprises or the disappointment that we saw at camp?
Marty the other day, I think he was being asked about Barron, and he was like, I don't think anyone had a bad camp.
Yeah, what was that?
Listen, quite clearly Joel Armia had a bad camp, but I would have liked to have seen more from Justin Barron. And I think Barron's reached a point in his career. Listen, he's still waiver exempt, but he's getting to a point where he's got to show why he was a first round pick. And he just hasn't shown that. I didn't think his level of urgency in training camp was high enough. He seemed timid on the ice. I think there's a lot. The tools are there for him. He just seems afraid to use them, and he's kind of in this not bad, because it is good for young players to be wary of making mistakes, but you don't want to let that cripple you. And it's interesting. We were talking to Uri Slavkovsky about that after the game in Ottawa on Saturday night, where he admitted last year he was highly focused on not making mistakes, on being a good player for the team, not putting the team in trouble. I think for Barron to be effective, there has to be some element of risk to his game. And when you look at how Norlinder performed in camp, he was taking those risks. He wasn't afraid. He was playing to his strengths, and even defensively was being assertive and aggressive and going at guys. And Barron just seems to be sitting back and making sure nothing gets behind him and making sure he doesn't turn the puck over, which is great. No one wants him to do those things, but you're not going to do anything good when that's your only focus, is not to do anything bad. And so,
but he still turned the puck over more than Norlinder did, despite the fact that he was trying not to make mistakes.
Yeah. So, listen, that's one guy I would be disappointed in. And I'm really quite sold on Emil Heideman. I got to say, like, it's, you look at the package, the physical package, Canadiens are not awash in like huge young forwards. The big reason why they took Uri Slafkovsky is because of the frame. Kirby Dach's a big guy, and they have some. They have Nick Suzuki always gets labeled as a small player. He's I think he weighted at 210 or 215 this year. He's a very solid guy, even though he's 5'11". But you look at Heideman, he stands out in that forward group. He's an appealing aspects to him, or what was Timmins' word that he liked to use. Trevor Timmins
he's got a dimension.
A dimension, yes, that's right. So he has, that shot of his is a dimension. The release, his ability to get it off, and I think he showed during training camp that he can bring a physical dimension, and that he can play with good players. The fact that he opened camp playing with Suzuki and Caulfield, to me was quite telling. He didn't last very long there, but they don't come up with those line combinations just in a bar on a napkin, and like just kind of come like they wanted to see something on day one of training camp, and they decided that what we wanted to see was Emil Heideman and how he looked with those two guys, and I think he, if I'm not mistaken, got a preseason game with them. But we saw. It's to me, that's to go back to what I was saying before. The fact that they didn't want Emil Heideman playing on a fourth line in Montreal. If I'm Emil Heideman, I take that as a positive. I'm sure he's disappointed that he got cut, but he's going to get top line minutes in Laval for as long as he's there. He'll probably be the first call up in terms of forwards. I think the Canadiens see a lot of offensive potential in him, and I think he showed some of it during this camp.
Yeah, and he showed more than his shot. He showed, a willingness to engage physically, to be strong on the forecheck. I think that he's got a very energetic brand of hockey to him. I think that there's still some awareness issues that can be corrected. There was this game against Toronto, and he was not the only one guilty on that, but his whole line actually, they had spent 45 seconds in the Leafs' end, and at some point Marner came back with the puck, entered the Canadian zone, and I think there was 3 Canadiens players around him, and Marner was alone. And the other guys, Heineman being one of them, could have skated back to the bench, but they decided to stay in the play, and basically they got stuck into their own end. Their shifts lasted 2 minutes, and they got scored on against. So,
I think one thing with Heineman that because he was so good coming to Laval last year, he only played a handful of games in Laval. He's coming right out of Sweden. All the things we say about Norlinder needing to adjust to the smaller ice, Reinbacher needing to adjust to the smaller ice at some point, obviously not this year, or maybe not until March at least. Emil Heineman has to adjust to the smaller ice as well. So what you just mentioned has nothing to do with big ice or small ice, but angles and forechecking and all the things that he did well, to me showed a pretty good adjustment to the smaller ice. I mean, he didn't look like a guy. He didn't look like a guy who seemed to have lost his bearings during games. I think with Reinbacher in particular, early on, especially at the tournament in Buffalo, there were multiple times where he literally skated full speed into the boards because didn't expect the boards to be there, and so it's like it's
objects in the mirror are closer than they appear.
Yes, exactly. Well, it takes me 3 strides to get from the net to the corner. Well, now it takes you 2. So it's like it's kind of that kind of thing. And so I think in Heineman's case, he's promising. Listen, I don't think he's ever gonna be sort of this superstar forward for the Canadiens. Well, I mean, who knows? But I doubt it. But as scoring depth, as a middle 6 guy potentially down the road, I think it's possible.
Yeah. Among the guys who were like pleasant surprises, I think that Alex Newhook has fit in nicely on this team so far. I really like the speed that he brings because it's a speed that's going to be very useful, I think, on the second power play. But it's also, he helps stretching the ice, and that's why even on the wing, he can be very useful doing that. And it just seems like there's so many attributes to this guy. Once again, I don't know if it's going to work out as well as it did with Kirby Dach, but I could easily see a situation where their former team will wonder, why did you give up on that guy so early? Because there's true potential there.
One thing that stood out to me about him is his closing speed is really good. Like, listen, he's fast, obviously, but he has, I think, a knack for sort of using his speed properly. Marty talks about that a lot, where he won't go right at you on the forecheck, and then all of a sudden, when you think he's kind of too far to be a factor, he'll just boom, boom, boom. He'll take 3 quick strides and he's on him, and it will really catch an opponent off guard. And I'm going to be intrigued to watch that during the regular season because I think he's a sneaky. He uses his speed in a kind of a sneaky way as a forechecker. Like, it really. That acceleration, that 0 to 60 ability of his, I think can be quite effective. And it's interesting to me, Marty talking about starting him on the wing, giving him fewer responsibilities, letting him play freer. Like, honestly, it's copy paste, put it on repeat. All the things he said about Kirby Dach last season, it's the exact same line. Like, almost, I I was half tempted to go back and check the audio of him explaining Kirby Dach being on the wing to start the year last year.
Yeah.
It sounded like the exact same thing. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think he's got a lot of dynamic elements to his game. I think his all-around game, his game away from the puck, is strong, and that he can help the Canadiens in their own end. I'll be curious to see if Anderson doesn't work out, if Newhook winds up on that line at some point. I believe the Canadiens kind of saw him as a fit there when they actually traded for him, and that speed, particularly on defense, being a positive factor to kind of lessen the load for Suzuki and Caulfield and try and shorten some of their shifts in the defensive zone. But for now, with Dach and Slafkovsky, that's a pretty quick line. I mean, Slavkovsky's a pretty good skater. When he's
the whole line has got huge potential.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and we should talk a little bit about Slav. I mean, it's like it's really like it's the guy's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. Not only is he the number one overall pick for the Canadiens, which is pressure enough, he's also seen as the future of Slovak hockey. He's one of the biggest forwards in the NHL.
Yeah.
Has an amazing skill set, and it's just like there's so many things that this guy has to manage. And to see him smiling in the dressing room on Saturday night after the game against Ottawa, where he played a pretty good game, had some ups and downs over training camp, but it's weird to say that at 19, and this is what I hate actually. It shouldn't be. It's not a make or break season for Juraj Slafkovsky. I think that should be very clear, and no one should look at it that way. But it's reality that every single thing he does is going to be scrutinized to no end. Game to game, a 3, 4, or 5 game slump is going to be bigger than it should be. But his headspace seems good. It seems really good. And I remember I chatted with Cole Caulfield about that at the golf tournament. And he was like, I was texting with him in the summer, and he knows what he has to do, and he's in a good space.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about him. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll believe it when I see it. But so far, so good.
To me, it was his beaming smile in the locker room in Ottawa after the game on Saturday that told it all. I think he looks like a guy who's happy where he's at. He understands all that's going on. But everything, on the first day of training camp, actually at the golf tournament, Martin Saint-Louis came and he said, to me, it's a balance between pressure and pleasure. That's the balance that Slav has got to strike. And I feel as though the pleasure will come naturally. He's a guy who likes to have fun. He's got that bubbly personality. He's naturally a very confident young man. And I think that, the concern about killing his passion or anything, I think he's a long way from that because it oozes out of him. Mm-hmm. But the pressure is significant. There's a pressure from the fans, the whole market actually, because you're tagged as a number one pick overall, and even though you remember on the night of on draft night, all the fans that had those Shane Wright jerseys, right? Nobody's going to be talking about Shane Wright anymore. He's been cut by the Seattle Kraken. And, who's in the American League to start the season.
Got an exemption to play in the American League.
Right. Yeah. But in a few weeks from now, the Canadiens are going to be in Arizona. Yeah. And there might be a lot of chatter about Logan Cooley, even though back in the draft, nobody was talking about Logan Cooley as a guy the Canadiens could have taken.
There were no Logan Cooley Canadiens jerseys at the draft.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He had the talent to be.
Very similar to Philip Zadina and Brady Tkachuk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Gosh, that's a good comparison. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. When it came down to Kotkaniemi, well, the other guy that everybody thought that it would be the alternative was Zadina, but no, it turned out that it was Tkachuk.
No, but several years later, everyone says I really wanted them to draft Tkachuk.
Yeah.
Whereas at the time, everyone was saying they should draft Zadina. Including me. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying I know anything more than like Zadina looked like a very tantalizing prospect, natural goal scorer. There was nothing. Brady Tkachuk's really kind of pedestrian numbers at college. There was all sorts of things that sort of suggested that But yeah, but you're right. That game in Arizona, which is coming up in less than a month,
it's going to be a talking point.
Will be that again. I always wanted them to take Logan Cooley, says the guy who had a Shane Wright jersey printed for the draft, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, maybe ultimately, you know, I really, you know, in 10 years from now, people will say, I really wish they had picked the best player on that draft, you know? Yeah, of course. But they go with the information that they got.
David Jiricek is really what I wanted. That's absolutely what I wanted. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So Slavkovsky might not end up putting up either more points or as many highlight reel plays as Cooley, but is he a guy that down the road is going to help you win playoff games? I think that's the measuring stick there. And in order to do that, he needs to progress into his game, but he seems in a good place in order to do that. And he doesn't, you know, there's this whole cliche in hockey that players keep saying, yeah, I'm aware of the pressure, but there's no bigger pressure than the one I put on myself. Well, heck, it's especially true with Slafkovsky because he says, I just don't want to be good. I want to be one of the best, you know, and he's got extremely high expectations for himself.
And so what's important here, it's funny that you mentioned that game in Arizona. The game in Arizona is on November 2nd. So this debate will not be settled between now and November 2nd. But obviously, if you're right, Slavkovsky gets off to a good start, he can lessen that environment that you just kind of previewed. November 2nd is also interesting, just kind of in closing here, because Christian Dvorak has been skating with the team for a while now.
Yeah.
Ken Hughes, right off the bat, before training camp, said Christian Dvorak will not be ready before November. Their first game in November is November 2nd in Arizona, a date that also coincides with the minimum amount of time and the minimum number of games Christian Dvorak would have to miss in order to be placed on off-season LTIR, which really made the Canadiens.
Yeah, but actually, Arpen, I think that it's the game after because it's got to be 10 games and 24 days. So I think it's the game after the one in St. Louis.
Is it not?
But in terms of 24 games,
that was the 10th game. Yeah, that's the 10th game exactly.
That's it. But the point remains valid.
The point is that Christian Dvorak, if you watch him skating, looks perfectly ready to start the season on Wednesday in Toronto, and he will not be doing that. So, anyhow, just
is that a charade? Is that what sort of shenanigan is that?
Listen, he's wearing a non-contact jersey.
Yeah,
that's all. That's all I'll say about that. But yes, he does. He's been skating for a while. He was skating with the guys before camp. He's skating for easily a month or close to it. And so, anyhow, he's not going to start the season. But all this to say that when he does return, whether it's in St. Louis after that Arizona game or whatever, or, you know, the minute that his LTIR minimum elapses, he's another factor that's going to add to the malleability of this Canadiens lineup because, you know, Sean Monahan is currently playing center on the third line. How long he stays there remains to be seen. Newhook could get a slot there at some point, but when Dvorak comes back, you could potentially have Monahan and Newhook on the wing, and really have a malleable lineup where you can really shape it depending on who you're facing, whether it's at home or on the road, really load it up or balance it out and gives Marty a lot more options, because I think personally the ideal winger for Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield is Sean Monahan in my eyes.
Okay.
But it's, you know, remains to be seen. I think he would be good with Doc and Slafkovsky. I think Slafkovsky played some of his best games last season with Monahan as a center. He basically makes every line he's on better, but for now he's going to be centering this gray hair line, I guess Ken Hughes would call it, but with Tanner Pearson and Brendan Gallagher, which will sort of be, you know, sort of Marty's defensive anchor line, especially on the road. You know, you have a D-zone draw, you don't know who Toronto's sending out. Send Monahan, Pearson, and Gallagher out, and you should feel pretty safe.
Yeah, that's an interesting line. It's not going to be the fastest by any means, but I wonder if it's going to be the sort of line that will enable Monahan to reconnect with, you know, all of his offensive potential. Because, you know, let's face it, Gallagher is a bit of a declining asset. Jury's still out for Pearson. I mean, he has not played since back November.
All three of them are in the same boat. that's what makes the line so interesting to me. They're all trying to write some version of a redemption story.
Yeah.
Pearson's in the same boat as Monahan was last year and frankly is this year, coming back from an injury that ended his season not long after Pearson's season ended. And Gallagher's, I mean, all three of them were at once upon a time highly effective offensive players in the NHL. To varying degrees, they're not anymore, at least in terms of being able to stay healthy or being effective. It's a fascinating line in the sense that they're all trying to write the same book.
Yeah.
More or less, just in different, some of the details are a bit different, but they're basically all in the same boat.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want to go to the extent that it's keeping their career alive, well, that boat is the raft of the Medusa.
Yeah, so, that boat is taking on water to some extent, but it's their ability to bail water is gonna determine how they do this season and whether they can give their career sort of a second wind. Which in all three cases, I hope they do for their sake. I mean, I don't know Pearson very well, but Monahan's appears to be very well liked in that room, and obviously you and I both have a long history with Brendan Gallagher. I'd like nothing more for him to be able to perform at a level that he's used to. He's a highly competitive guy. And I know that he's done a good job keeping it in, but he's keeping receipts on people talking about the end of Brendan Gallagher, and he's keeping receipts. And so at some point, for his sake, on a personal level, I hope he's able to cash those receipts and be like, hey, Arpin, I remember when you said this. I'll be like, yeah, sure. Busted. Good for you, man. You proved me wrong.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, Arpin, there's going to be a ton to talk about when it comes to Montreal Canadiens. Their place in the Eastern Conference in the Atlantic Division will have, obviously, when we do our second episode of the Basu and Godin notebook, we'll have.
Still sounds weird.
I know. We'll get used to it. We'll get used to it.
We should explain to the listeners that we used to, obviously. Yeah. For those of you who subscribe to the Athletic, every Monday we ran a notebook called Basu and Godin, and that was basically all it was called. But basically, it was stuff we gathered over the course of the week, sort of the greatest hits of things that didn't make it into stories, and we'd package it on Monday, and it became it's sort of among our readers on the Athletic, became a popular thing. So obviously, Marc-Antoine no longer works for the Athletic, so we're not going to have a Basu and Godin notebook. So we decided to have this be our Basu and Godin notebook. So you'll have it twice a week instead of just once a week, but still on Mondays.
Yeah, absolutely. And on Mondays, generally, we would like to run a mailbag and have just answer questions from our listeners. So we've got we have a Twitter account, Basu and Godin, so BASUANDGODIN. And we've got an email address where you can write to us. So basuandgodin@gmail.com. So you can just connect with us, and that way we could read your questions or comments and make it part of our Monday episodes. So that's it. I'm personally, I don't know about you, Arpin. Well, I sort of know, but I'm so excited to be back. I'm so excited to.
I'm not at all excited. I'm not at all excited. I hate this. Who the hell signed me up for this? I hate this. No, of course I'm excited. I'm super excited that we can do this, and I'm super excited to be part of SDPN and to work with them all season and build something.
A good bunch of people. It's
so far so good.
Yeah,
let's see.
It's good. It seems like a good team to play for.
No, absolutely. I'm super excited, and I'm just glad that we'll be able to share our thoughts with all of you who were such loyal supporters of the podcast previously, that we found a way to make this work so that we can continue sharing our thoughts with you throughout the season, twice a week, right here on SDPN.
So spread the word. We're back. Bye-bye, everybody.
Talk to you Friday.